So you ever get that feeling you're so far behind you think you're ahead? And I think this isn't a critical appraisal of us in the industry. And this isn't a critical appraisal of the pharmaceutical industry. I think what I want to talk a little bit about is a challenge. It's a challenge in terms of, are we doing what we can to be able to stay ahead of what is an ever-changing market? To me, I think we look at there's four key influencers, and some of them we've touched on earlier today, right? There's digital media. See, healthcare professionals have access to information where in the past they relied on the thousands of people that we put out in the field, the investment that we put out into the field. For those of you who have kids, I have 4 TVs at home. I have 2 kids. My kids do not watch any other TVs. The reason why is they're on their iPads and iPhones, and that's where they're doing it, because they're getting the information and the TV shows they want, when they want, where they want it, versus me still sitting on my couch, flipping through the multitude of channels going, there's nothing on. Reimbursement, we talked about that earlier, so I'm not going to repeat that, but it's the complexities there. It's a global issue that's impacting Canada. It's impacting Canada both on terms of the price levels, political pressures, and as well as an industry, how we come to market and sell Canada as a prosperous place to be able to invest. There's an expanding focus on outcomes. We see more and more, there's a need for REMS, there's a need for outcomes-based thinking. There's also a bigger need in terms of post-marketing surveillance and surveys. And lastly, and this is the most interesting one as well as I feel, is the impact of patient groups is now going beyond advocacy. We're seeing patient groups are now playing more of a role in terms of clinical trials. They're investing in startups. They're also, in certain areas, starting to play a bigger role as payers. So they're putting more stakes to the game. So the market is changing around us quite significantly, and I do think we need to change the way that is. We can't accomplish that in 10 minutes. So for today's intents and purposes, I'm going to focus on the first one. So let's start off with, what percentage of physicians today do you think use the internet to access information? So now that I gave you guys the answer, it shows you were all paying attention. It's bang on to 86%. So congratulations, you guys haven't fallen asleep or anything. I find this study interesting, and there's a lot of studies if you go on the web to look at the internet use in healthcare. But what I find interesting about this study is, A, it was published by Google, but secondly is this is 6 years ago. And 6 years ago, 86% of physicians used the internet to access information. 65% of our healthcare professionals, primary care doctors, use the internet as well. What I also found quite interesting in this is, and this is again 6 years ago, is greater than 80% of physicians found that the quality of information is increasing. They found that there's greater value and reliance on using the internet. And the last one is that the internet is actually improving the way they practice medicine. It's frightening to see sort of the over-reliance of this information. In fact, what this study also goes into is 90% of healthcare professionals actually look on the web while they're in their offices. And the average time is 3 minutes. So they're getting the information when they want, where they want it, and in the amount of time that they have available to them, because we all know how busy they are. They're competing with our field folks who are coming in with a coffee, a Tim Hortons Donuts, and trying to squeeze in 10 to 15 minutes so that we can get access. So the challenge is there. On top of that, when we dug into, so what are physicians looking for? Again, there's no surprise to this, right? You got 3/4 of doctors are looking at specific drug information, general information about medicines. You've also got half of doctors looking at what are the new indications, clinical trials, and therapies in study. What I find interesting when you look at this list is, one, they're going online to look at information that our sales reps are giving them. Medicals, also in that same vein, they're also going online to get in what is available to our physicians as well through medical. So the challenge still remains there, and are we upping our game? What I also find interesting in this study is that 30% of physicians have changed prescriptions and or indicated a new therapy based on what they've seen on the internet. So it doesn't look good, right? I don't want to come up here again and shit all over everybody and think it's, oh, woe is us and all that stuff. Because again, it's counter to Canada being a great place to operate. And we do need to invest. But I think we need to start thinking differently. Where we see our medical and sales reps, they are ranked at the lowest. But there is a silver lining to this. And that is when we look at this idea of they will occasionally see our field folks. 41%, biggest in all the numbers there. When they said they would is when they see that the people are providing value and partnering with them in their practice. So this challenges our thinking in terms of looking at how we're incentivizing and also motivating our folks. Is it beyond reach and frequency? Is it beyond share of voice? And should we be looking at differently in terms of saying, how are we adding value and creating true partnerships? So obviously the knock-on of this is, what's this doing to our access? This is probably no surprise to a lot of you, but I figured we had to ask a question. I figured I'd ask an easy one. So what percentage of physicians are considered limited or no access? Wow, you guys, actually it's interesting. Knowing what we know there, I'm surprised we're still doing what we do. Again, and this is a study from the US, but it acts as a surrogate to the Canadian market as well, right? 240,000 physicians. Over the last 10 years, access has declined from 80% to lower than 47% now. So there is a knock-on effect, right? We continue to put people out there. They're not being effective. We're spending money. We're not creating value. So I'm not saying we should stop. What I am saying is this, is when we choose to invest in looking at field forces, this is sales, this is medical, this is market access, where historically we've looked at physicians and pharmacies, for example. I think there's the opportunity for us to start looking at a more integrative approach and start developing our people and recruiting people to look at different channels and multi-channels and creating a more of a key accounts thinking. Now, coming up here and not being sort of the naysayer or the seagull of sort of shitting on everything and flying away, I figured I'd come forward with a few ideas and some thought-provoking ideas for us to consider. One is the opportunity is for us to be able to catalyze partnerships, right? Address the needs of the broader audience. By doing this, we look at the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and looking at an integrated customer approach, which is what I just showed on the previous slide. As we recruit and we develop, is there a greater necessity for us to develop the athlete? Right? This broader scope of thinking, being able to do more. They might not be sort of a mile deep and an inch wide. Maybe we need to look at it more in terms of an inch deep and a mile wide. Is there something we can learn from the medical devices industry? Here we have their folks who are out in the field. They not only sell the products, they deal with customer service. They get into the hospitals and adjudicate payment and transfer of therapy. And in fact, they're also in the operating rooms, helping the physicians use the product. Is this something we need to start thinking about as an industry? Another idea is to create synergies between digital and human interactions. Again, what can we learn from other industries? Right? Packaged and consumers goods seems to be using this quite well and to their success. Obviously, I understand the regulatory environments associated with it, but are we doing enough and should we be thinking more? Right? Let's not break our arms patting ourselves on the back with e-details and tablets. Right? That's not being digital. Let's go beyond that and think more. And I think there is a bit of a challenge as us in an industry to start looking at what can we do more around the media, right? Social media is here to stay. We need to start working about how do we get into it, because it's well ahead of us, and are we being reactive, or can we proactively be involved in this? Now, all of this is all well and good, and I know you're all probably sitting here going, okay, great. Tell me something I don't know. I'm facing your pain. I know your problem. In the end, I think as an industry, we also need to start looking at reassessing our regulatory and our compliance risks. Right? Let's not be afraid of the dark. Right? Let's look at breaking the models and really assess what risk is. Because at the end of the day, when you see the media and the press, it's very rarely do you say, an MSL got the company into trouble, or a sales rep did something wrong. It's typically the company name. So it doesn't matter who's in there. It's as an industry, we need to look at, are we creating value? How do we create greater value? And how do we stay ahead of an ever-evolving market? Thank you.